Good evening, everyone, and welcome on this very, very wet Somerset night to this very special event. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Stephen Moss. I'm the president of the Somerset Wildlife Trust, and I'm very proud to be president of a trust that works so hard to restore wildlife to our wonderful county. I'm delighted tonight to welcome guest speakers from within and outside the trust who are going to be talking to you about Team Wilder. This is our second Somerset event to launch Team Wilder. It's a movement for nature, but it's a movement also for nature and people and places. And it's bringing those three things together. Those of you who were at the previous event will know a little bit about it, but don't worry if you weren't, because you're going to learn a lot more tonight. We'll be taking questions at the end today, rather than after each presentation. So we'd love you to post your questions in the chat, or you can send them privately to questions for the panel in the chat box. We'll be recording this meeting and it will be available on the Somerset Wildlife Trust website over the next few days. And we do have a subtitle function for those who require it. Again, if you check the chat box, you'll see how to join that. I'm very pleased now to welcome our first speaker tonight, our Chief Executive of the Trust, Georgia Stokes. Georgia.
Thank you, Stephen, and good evening, everybody. Welcome. It's wonderful to see so many of you. I'm just going to share my screen. So my job tonight is to give you a little bit of context of our Wilder Somerset strategy, of which Team Wilder and our work with people is a fundamental part. And as Stephen said, we launched our strategy in May of this year with an event focusing on our first goal around nature's recovery. And this is our second event, and we have a third event coming up. But before I get to that, just a quick reminder of kind of where we've been, and many of you may well have been involved in the strategy consultation that we held. Fortunately, we managed to do most of this pre-lockdown, so we were able to hold some focus groups. We had an online consultation, and we had some task and finish groups as well. We had hundreds of responses, which is fantastic, and thank you if you were involved in that. Just a few key points to bring out of the consultation. There was a very strong feeling that we need to focus on our nature reserves and that they are the heart of the ecological network of Somerset, that the action is needed in the context of the ecological and climate emergencies, that there was a desire for the Trust, Somerset Wildlife Trust, to buy new land to look at buffering our reserves, to engage with, support and work with landowners and farmers. And really importantly, and the focus of this evening, was that Somerset Wildlife Trust should look at how we can support others to take action through training, through guidance, through advice, but the focus being on action for nature. So how can we play a role in catalysing and inspiring that kind of action? Clearly that we are a science and evidence-led organisation, and that people want the Trust to show leadership and be bold, stand up and speak out for nature. So all of those elements, we hope we have managed to translate into our strategy, Wilder Somerset 2030, and that is now available on our website, and the link will be shared in the chat as well, should you wish to read it if you haven't already. So just to give you a very quick whistle-stop tour of the key elements of the strategy, we have set out our vision as Somerset having a county-wide nature recovery network. And the focus there is about nature being in recovery. It's not just about halting the decline, which we all know, and we could have a whole session on, I won't go into that now, but actually turning that round and turning that into a positive so that nature is recovering. And for that, we need more space for nature, for wildlife, but there's a very clear focus on people, because we want it to benefit people as well as playing its part, because we know it can, in reversing biodiversity loss and tackling climate change. So that's how we've articulated our vision for the next 10 years for where we want Somerset to be. And Somerset Wildlife Trust's role in that is to work for the changes that are needed for nature and people to thrive together. And clearly it's the together part that is to be emphasised, really, that it is about nature and people. And that is a really core focus of our strategy. So underpinning our vision and our mission, we have 3 goals. And what's really important about these is that they are connected and interconnected, and we need all 3 of them in order to achieve the vision and the mission. As you can see, I thought, it's like a 3-legged stool. If one of those does not work, then the strategy doesn't work. So our first goal, which we launched in May, is about nature recovering everywhere with restored natural processes and at least 30% of land and sea managed positively for nature. And we had a fantastic event in May, which hopefully some of you were able to join us for, where we considered the different approaches for putting nature into recovery, looking at rewilding, looking at protecting and managing those really core sites, our nature reserves and other sites that are designated, and the role of farmers and regenerative farming practices. And that is recorded and on our website. If you weren't able to join us, do have a look. In order to do that, we need people. We need people to be involved. We need you, and we need more people. So launching today, very exciting, is our approach to that, which is Team Wilder, which is about building a movement for nature. So we want everyone to have the opportunity to experience nature, and we want to catalyse action by aiming for a social tipping point with at least 1 in 4 people taking action for nature's recovery. And we're calling that Team Wilder, and Jolien will be talking more about our approach to that later on. So I shall not dwell too much, but this is what we are launching tonight, and we hope that you will all be part of that. In fact, you are all part of that because you're here with us this evening. We have a 3rd event coming up, which will be on the 30th of November, and we hope you will join us for that as well, which is to launch our 3rd goal, the final goal of our strategy, which is focusing on science and monitoring through the launch of, we plan to launch in the spring, a State of Nature platform. And as part of that will be a huge element of citizen science, which is where you again hopefully will come in around engaging people, supporting people, to enable us to collect more data, to be able to look at patterns, and crucially use that to inform action and what we deliver under goal 1, which is about nature's recovery. So you can see how the 3 goals hopefully are interconnected and are all really important for delivery of our overall strategy. So that was very quick, I know, but hopefully you'll go away and read our strategy. I'm really excited that we're all here tonight, and I can't wait to hear your questions at the end after we've heard from our wonderful speakers. So I will hand back to Stephen. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Georgia. Our first speaker tonight is Leah Barbette. Leah is a postgraduate researcher in environmental psychology at the University of Derby, and also a lecturer in psychological research methods at the, and I hope I pronounced this right, Fernuniversität Hagen in Germany. She's going to talk tonight not only about what we can do, but also why we act and sometimes don't act for nature conservation, and the special role that our own personal relationship to nature can play in Team Wilder. Leah.
Hello everyone, 1 second, I'm going to share my screen. So yes, as was just introduced, I'll be talking a bit about the science side of taking action for nature, specifically the psychological perspective. And my work so far has been focusing on the research question, what can we do for nature and why do or don't we? And with you as an audience, I probably won't have to explain that we're currently experiencing a couple of environmental problems, one of them being climate change, and another slightly less discussed one is biodiversity loss. And that's where there's a big problem, because climate change is reported on in the press and in scientific literature about 8 times as much as biodiversity loss. But we know that the consequences of biodiversity loss are going to be equally as devastating as those of climate change. Of course, they're interrelated, but more and more conservation practitioners and conservation organizations like the Wildlife Trusts have been calling for action on nature conservation specifically. And that's kind of an area that has been neglected in environmental psychology as well, because we've always been focusing on actions to take for climate change. So my work is about changing that and looking at nature conservation specific behaviors. So to do that, we started by defining something that we called pro-nature conservation behaviors. And we defined them as positive actions that have impact on local wildlife. Quite important here is the positive action in opposition to positive inaction, which is something that's quite often looked at in wider environmental behaviors, which is something that you stop doing. So quite often people are asked to stop eating meat or to stop taking their car as much. So for us, it was quite important to look at active things that people can do. And because I'm a psychologist, I don't necessarily know which behaviors are actually useful and impactful. So what we did is we collected a really long list of possible behaviors from literature, that was scientific literature, but also grey literature. So looking, for example, at the Wildlife Trust's website, what do organizations that do work in conservation want people to do? And we sent this really long list out to a bunch of experts, practitioners, but also academics who work in conservation and biology and ecology, and asked them, are these behaviors useful, yes or no? And then we collected the ones that had the highest expert agreement. So just to kind of showcase them a bit, we divided them into 3 different groups of behaviors. So there's the civil actions, which are all about your role as a citizen, and they include behaviors such as volunteering, but also more political behaviors such as voting or contacting your local authorities, but even just talking to others about conservation issues. And then there's things that people can do at home or in nature. So for example, when you're on a walk, especially if you've got a dog, to try to not disturb nature, provide some food or water for animals. And then the last category is something that's quite UK specific, which is gardening and land management behaviors, because a lot of people in the UK do have access to a garden, so they can use those spaces to provide kind of a safe haven for nature by planting pollinator-friendly plants, leaving an unmaintained area, having a little hole in their fence for hedgehogs. So these are the behaviors that we now know are useful and impactful. And you may be asking yourself, yeah, but why is a psychologist telling me this? Because that's where we stumble into quite a problem, which is that people care. I'm sorry. They really care about nature and what's going on with nature, that nature is in trouble, but they struggle to translate that into actions. In fact, about 72% of people report a gap between their attitudes and intentions and their actions. And this is where we as psychologists come in, because we can use research to systematically bridge that gap. And we do that by first measuring behaviors. So I've already talked about a couple of behaviors that we might want to look at. And when we can measure those, we can then start understanding them, what drives those behaviors, or what actually presents a barrier to engagement in these behaviors. Because if we know that, we can then develop targeted programs of communication or even intervention to help people engage with those behaviors. So starting with the first step, how do we measure behaviors. We don't come into your house and look at your garden, because that's on the one hand quite invasive, and on the other hand a lot of work. So what we tend to do is we use a questionnaire scale. You will probably have answered one at some point in your life, or even used one for something such as an evaluation. And they are just a bunch of questions, in this case a bunch of behaviors, that capture all the different aspects of the concept that you're trying to measure. So if you think back to all the actions I talked about, we've got kind of more like civil actions, but also gardening behaviors. They're very different, and we want to capture them all. And then you just answer on a rating scale. I never engage in this. I always do this. I sometimes do this. And in psychology, we really carefully develop them. We check which kind of groups of behaviors fall in there. And we developed a total of 3 scales for pro-nature conservation behaviors. There's an adult long form, but also an adult short form, because we want this questionnaire scale to be used as an evaluation tool by nature conservation organizations as well. And they don't always have the time to ask people 20 questions at the end of an event. So we've got a long form and a short form, and then we've also got a child version, because obviously you can't ask children who they're voting for in the next election. And we've used this to look at what actually makes people engage. We've used this questionnaire and added some other questionnaires about kind of more psychological variables. And we found one really, really important factor, and that's nature connectedness. Nature connectedness is a psychological construct that describes the relationship that people have with nature, but it goes beyond contact or exposure. So it's not about how often does someone go to a forest. It's about their emotional connection to nature. So how does it make them feel? Are they happy when they're in nature? It really encompasses a lot about how you see yourself in relation to nature. So people with high nature connectedness tend to think of themselves as a part of nature, rather than this is nature and this is me and we've got nothing to do with each other. And they're the kind of people who will go, I love to hear the birds sing. It just makes me so happy and feel so warm inside. And I love to look outside and see how at the moment all the leaves are turning orange and it's beautiful. And this is a really important emotional construct, because we know that it's good for nature and we know that it's good for people as well. And I'll explain to you why that is. So nature connectedness has been found in various research to be an essential predictor of not only pro-nature conservation behaviors, but also the more wider pro-environmental behaviors that relate to climate change. But it's also related to people's personal well-being. So it's related to 2 aspects of well-being. One is the feeling good aspect, and the other one is the functioning well aspect. So people with high nature connectedness feel better, and they also tend to have an easier time going through their daily lives. And it becomes an important tool when we want to help people engage with nature, because we know how to improve nature connectedness. It's not something that you're just born with and you either like nature or you don't, but it's something that you can really foster and help people develop. And you can do that through 5 pathways. Those pathways are contact, so experiencing nature with all of your senses; emotion, as I said earlier, about kind of thinking about how it makes you feel happy when you hear the birds sing; compassion, so doing something for nature can help you to develop a deeper connection to nature; meaning, finding meaning in nature, that can relate to kind of anything. For example, when we're thinking about the leaves turning orange at the moment, we know that's a marker of autumn and how the seasons change, how it's going to be cold and wet soon. So all these things in nature that kind of relate to our lives and our culture and have meaning for us are quite important. And then beauty, I don't think I need to explain much, because you'll all here, you'll probably find nature beautiful. Most people find wildflowers absolutely beautiful. And when we're focusing on these 5 pathways, when we're experiencing nature, it can really help us to get a deeper connection to nature. And you might have noticed, but some of these pathways actually relate to pro-nature conservation behaviors. So the compassion pathway, quite obviously, if you're doing something for nature, you can develop your nature connectedness. So we think there might be some kind of feedback loop where if you've got a higher nature connectedness, you're more likely to do something for nature. But a lot of the actions you do in nature can also help you to develop an even deeper connection to nature through contact when you're planting some wildflowers and you're touching the soil, through beauty when you then get to look at the wildflowers in your garden, through compassion, through meaning because you understand the meaning of pollination and how having wildflowers in your garden helps with pollination and helps pollinators. And that's why we think nature connected is might be such an important, not only emotion, but also tool for people who want to help other people engage with nature, because we can help them develop it, but we also know when they start doing more for nature, they will have personal benefits because they will have a deeper relationship with nature, which will be good for their own well-being. And there's one other thing about nature connectedness, it's that it shows us maybe people that we need to focus on because they tend to have lower nature connectedness. And one group of people that tends to have quite low nature connectedness are teenagers. There's something called the teenage dip, which describes how teenagers tend to have lower nature connectedness than children and adults. And that's a pattern that we see mirrored in pro-nature conservation behaviors. So teenagers also tend to do less for nature than children and adults. And some researchers in psychology say, oh, it's teenagers, they're on their phones all day and that's all they do. I don't necessarily agree with that. And I think that there will be some stories from young people who do a lot later on tonight who will show that not all teenagers don't do anything with nature. But I also think that it's about the structures we provide for teenagers, because we always take children into nature and we help them to experience nature, but we stop doing that for teenagers, and instead we tell them to focus on school, prepare for their GCSE, etc. So maybe this just shows that we need to help teenagers engage with nature more, rather than telling them that they're the horrible people who don't do anything. And that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions about my references or resources, or if you would like me to send you some of my resources, feel free to email me. My email is on the screen right now. And if you want to join the conversation on social media, I'm not very active on Twitter, but I've put my Twitter handle here. But my supervisor, Miles Richardson, he's really active on Twitter in the topic of nature conservation and nature connectedness especially. So maybe feel free to follow him if that's something you're interested in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah, and thank you for sharing that with us. And particularly, I know, Miles, and I know the work you're doing at the University of Derby is so important in this. And I think we are building, aren't we, this fantastic connectedness. Connectedness is something that our next two speakers are going to talk about, because that's at the heart of what they do. Anita Roy and Helen Gillingham are from Transition Town, Wellington. And this started as a project in 2008. It's part of an international movement called Transition Network. And what this involves is a group of local people volunteering to make their town better, frankly, more carbon neutral, yes, sustainable, biodiverse, and all those things, but actually creating communities. And they're going to talk about how they went about this in Wellington. Over to you, Anita and Helen.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll just give a brief introduction of how our group started. Now, we started in 2008, a couple of years after the Transition Handbook was written by Rob Hopkins in Totnes, and we were really inspired. The majority of the group made up of people who had recently retired, whose children had recently gone to university, slightly older age group, I guess, and the youngest at 20, I think, but I didn't do any social media at all. And we did a few events and things like that, tried to advertise through posters and newspapers and things. But I must say, since the IPCC report, I think, was that 2018? End of 2018 or mid. it really helped our group to be a bit more galvanised, because suddenly the public were, and rather than feeling like we were trudging through mud, there were much more people inquiring about what we were doing. And I was inspired to start doing Facebook, which really helped our cause. So over the last few years, we'd been doing various things like chutney days. We did find that food orientated things did tend to get people's attention. But in 2015-16, we started to manage some council-owned patches of land in the town. And is a herb bed just on a corner of a road. The soil is full of raw we could grow as herbs, but the transformation was lovely. This was actually, our group was approached by somebody who lived in one of the houses that overlooked it. Then we moved on to Post Close about a year later in 2017. Took us a couple of years to get from brambles, tree stumps, loads of nettles and things to actually planting the trees in the winter 18 to 19. But now it's a lovely little mini orchard, and there's a school just around the corner. So we try and aid children with what's there, with a nice information board. And then we took on a much larger, which is an acre in Longacre in 2019. This is a before picture. It was basically a bit of land along a railway that was full of brown nettles and fly tip rubbish. We did a lot of public consultation to try and get an idea of what people would like, but with the overall thought of planting fruit trees and nut trees, because we believe that foraging for your own food is a really good way of connecting you with where your food comes from. And now the field is looking lovely. It's full of insects buzzing and wildflower meadow. Yeah, so these are some bog plants that we planted. There's a sustainable drainage dip, which is another reason why the field hasn't been built on. There's this water that we can utilise as a bog garden, and we got the locals to grow wildflowers from seed. So we're now embarking on our biggest project, which is actually 8.5 acres. We've just been doing public consultation this year, and we're going to be primarily focusing on forest garden and a wildlife meadow. But what I really like about these places is that they're all public access, and people that maybe don't can come and enjoy open green space. And we've got facility to teach you know, people about food on site, and schools can use the areas as well to teach their children. So yeah, we hope in the future this will be another really beautiful area. But when we did all these different sites full of food, we created a foraging map to basically show people where it was. Did a hand-drawn map of the town. And that actually inspired us. It was actually about a year's work before the first lockdown happened, but we got inspired to do a wildlife map to actually show where you can see different wildlife creatures. Are we still there?
I don't know.
Can we escape and see?
Oh, yeah.
Can you still hear
Sorry.
us? Couldn't see anything then. So we created a wildlife map of the town. I'm just going to hand over to Anita now.
So I think the main idea that we wanted to get across today was that if you are thinking of doing something, taking action, whether it's just you on your own or with a group of friends or neighbours or whatever, it's amazing how once you start something, it snowballs. So from the foraging map to the wildlife map, we thought we would just do another similar kind of thing and print it and hand it out to people. We have copies in the libraries. We have, it's just a nice way to look at the town slightly differently, because if you hover over a map, usually most maps are to do with buildings and roads, and the bits in between really aren't kind of full of anything. They just look like blanks. So we thought, well, let's look at all of the bits in between. And actually what you end up realizing is that the landscape around you in your town is an amazing mosaic of potential wildlife habitat, really. So then we decided to use the idea of the map to springboard other things. So we came up with this wildlife gardening booklet, which itself is a kind of a handbook on all the different things that you can do to create, to kind of imagine your own bit of garden as though you were a hedgehog or a bat or a slow worm or a bird, and looking at it through the eyes of the creatures that we share our environment with, and saying, okay, what would I really like to see in that garden? What's going to attract me to that garden? So as you can see, we came up with this series of tick boxes so that anyone and everyone who can wield a pen, from the youngest to the oldest, could just go through and say, okay, have I got any bare earth in my garden? Tick. Have I got any night opening flowers for insects? Tick. Oh, I don't have a bog garden, but I might think about putting in a pond. Tick. So along with that, we came up with the idea of doing some certificates. I mean, these are really fun and they've been incredibly popular in our town, where you can get a gold, silver or a bronze star certificate for your garden. We fill in the name and the address of the person who's got that and hand post it through their door, through our network of really lovely volunteers who have signed up with us. And one of the most important things in terms of creating wildlife habitat, as you all probably know, is getting more biodiversity into grass and creating more meadows and wildflowers. So again, we thought, how do we give the people that want to do this the tools? As Leah was saying, there is that, how do we help to bridge that gap between people's desires and intentions to do something and actually doing it? We wanted to make it as easy, as fun and as effective as possible. So we came up with these wildflower seed mixes, each of which has been hand mixed.
hand weighed out
with little tiny teaspoons, which in itself took, I mean, ages and hours and lots of people. But the thing is that I think when you're starting anything, if you can make it fun and if you can make it pretty, I know it sounds like a bit of a throwaway thing, but the way to engage people is to make them enjoy themselves, and that, again, taking up on what Leah was saying about beauty, if you make something attractive and if you make something really pretty and beautiful to look at, you're really going to enhance people's desire to act on that. And I think we had a lot of people saying that when they had these wildflower seeds through their doors, because they look very attractive, it felt like a present. It felt like a little gift that they were being given. So what next?
So yeah, I mean, essentially what we've started to do is offer the design work that we've done, because I mean, it was a really brilliant chance that we had to do that. There's Somerset Western Taunton Council did a grant fund called the Community Chest, and they gave us the money to actually fund these seeds and the booklets and things like that. And we didn't get paid for it, but we had the time because of lockdown.
We love furlough. This is all thanks to furlough.
I mean, not everybody's going to have the chance to actually spend that amount of time. So what we'd like to do is basically gift what our time that we've done on this already to any group that wants to basically take that resource and run with it. So if you like a copy of the artwork for the booklet, I've got a blog on how we drew the map. I didn't do very well at A-level art. I'm not really an artist. I tend to copy things, really. I'm not very good at creative art, but it's not actually that hard to draw a map. It just takes patience. and a steady hand. So, I mean, if you wanted to have a go on that, there's the guide of how to do it. We would love this idea to spread. And the 30 different suggestions that we've got in the booklet and getting people to tick the boxes, I think everybody loves a list. And we've if you want to share screen, are you sharing screen?
Yeah.
This is Wedmore's taken up the offer to repurpose it for their town.
So with the booklet, what we did was register it under Creative Commons, which means that as long as you acknowledge where the original artwork came from, and as long as it's not used for commercial purposes, this can be used by anyone for any purpose. So we were really, really thrilled when Green Wedmore said, yeah, we would like to do our own version of this. So we sent them all the files. They changed some of the text. You know, the nice thing about technology like this and projects like this is that you can really personalize it almost, and certainly make it absolutely relevant to your little local area. And that's what I think helps people to get engaged. So Wedmore have made a map that's obviously looks very different from the one that we had. And it's relatively easy and simple for them to do, and to just slip that into their version of our booklet. We were delighted when Froome actually approached us to do the same thing, and it's different from them. The pages are the same, but the map, we don't have a map at the end. So there are 4 other groups that are interested in taking the work that we've done and using it, repurposing it for their own villages and towns, which is really, really exciting. And we want to specifically thank Bryony and the people at the Wildlife Trust for really supporting this and helping us to disseminate all this stuff out there, because there's no point kind of reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, something else I'll just mention at the end is Cirque's mapping of different animals is really relevant, I think, project as well. When we did the map, it was very unscientific but really good for community engagement. Is we just asked on Facebook and spread it around the community Facebook groups, have you seen a bat? And saw all the replies and sift through all the comments and everybody's postcode that they posted. So the postcodes are rough, you know, but you know, we got something like 100 people saying that they'd seen a bat, and we went down the list of amphibians and hedgehogs and everything like that, and it got people sharing videos of hedgehogs in their garden, and I really hope that we might be able to connect in a mapping kind of way somehow with Cirque, and we've bought the domain wildlifemap.org, and hopefully we can do something like that to join the different towns together that are hopefully going to do something with this material. So yeah, if you'd like to find out more about us, it's ttw.org.uk, and also we're on Facebook, which is Transition Town Wellington, so you can always contact us later.
And we'd just like to end with the Transition Town philosophy thingy, which Rob Hopkins, who started Transition Town all those years ago, kind of came up with. It's the philosophy is basically that if we work, shall I do? Yeah. If we work on our own, alone, it'll be too little. If we wait for governments to act, it'll be too late. But if we work together in small local communities, it might just be enough just in time. So that is the power of localism and collective action, plus fun, plus beauty. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Helen. That's really inspirational. Some wonderful comments, lots of questions in the chat box. Please keep adding them. And also some very useful things talking about what other communities are going to be doing. What I think is so special about this is the way that you've made this work, and it works beautifully for small towns like Wellington and large villages like Wedmore and lots in between. And Somerset is full of communities like that. And I think this is going to be such an important thing for Somerset in the future. And it fits our philosophy, doesn't it, of have fun and, you know, work locally. For the next section, we're going to be talking much more about what children can do. Clearly, children are children and young people are absolutely crucial in Team Wilder, because we need them to form lifelong connections to the natural world. We need them to act. We need them for their ideas. And we're seeing this with Somerset Youth Parliament, who appeared last time when we did this, and also, you know, organisations, national ones like A Focus on Nature, which have representatives here in Somerset. But we're going to hear now from two people from schools, from Millfield School and Otterhampton School. And we're going to start with Carl Leonard. Carl's the environmental coordinator from Millfield, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what they're doing and how they're offering inspiration and ideas to other schools. Carl. Do we have Carl? If Carl's dropped out for the moment, which is possible with all the problems we're having. Are you there, Carl?
Yeah, I'm back now. Sorry, I was muted.
No worries. Off you go.
Couldn't unmute myself. I think I really need to say how inspirational those last two people were. They're fantastic what they were doing there. I'm certainly going to take a lot away from that. Back to school. That was brilliant. Yeah, my name's Carl Leonard, and I'm the environmental coordinator at Millfield School. I teach physics at the senior school and run a boarding house at the prep school. So I work with children from about 8 or 9 years old all the way up to 19 years old. And I was very interested in what Leah had to say. I think I personally find that at younger ages, children are very excited about the natural world and the world immediately around them. So they're very easily interested in nature, and then that interest diminishes quite rapidly as they approach their teens and become teenagers, and then we find by the time they get to the sixth form, they're very much influenced by the media, particularly social media and celebrities, and they will jump on things then and get passionate about things that are presented to them, ideas are presented to them. I must point out, obviously, that's my observation. It's very general, over my observation over 21 years of doing it now. But I think it's important, though, that when we do get any enthusiasm from the children at any stage of their childhood, we use that and we guide that, educate them, and steer that enthusiasm in the right direction, because we can't force the enthusiasm onto children. So it's whenever we get any passion, even if it makes us step back a little bit at the moment, we take that enthusiasm and we try and nurture it, and let's say and inspire them and educate them when they've got that enthusiasm. Here at the pre-prep, we have a forest school on site, and the children go up there and they start off at young ages by identifying what the wildlife that they see. As they grow up a little bit, they then start doing nature walks and outdoor activities. By the time they're in the senior school at year 9, we do a conservation project. We have our own site, a place called Worley Hill, which joins on to Somerset Wildlife Trust properties. And every week we take a different group, a small group of year 9s out there, and they do various activities, from things like coppicing, repairing pathways, walls, fences, and even do the things like the butterfly surveys and things like that. And as I said earlier, it tends to be about the time they're starting to lose interest. But rather interestingly, when I take them back there, when they're sixth formers, and they look back at the work that they've done 3 or 4 years ago, they're fascinated by it, and they get going again. It inspires them again. One of the attributes the school tries to encourage in youngsters is to be disruptors. It's one of our buzzwords, if you like, our keywords. And we want them to challenge the norm. We want them to ask why we don't do things better. And it's one of the things, the values we try and install in the children. And we don't want the children to give the children our opinions. We want them to form their own. And they have a very powerful voice. The head's very keen. Our current head is really keen that the student voice is incredibly powerful. So when they come with ideas, then they are very much listened to and actioned. But it tends to be about the big things. It tends to be the big things, the climate change, Greta Thunberg. They'll like a march, they'll like a protest. They'll feel emotional about the plastic in the oceans, or eating meat and things like that. And what we have to do is we then have to try and educate them and teach them. And as adults, a lot of adults, we're not very good at this. We have to try and teach them to not take everything that they're given through the media for granted, to do their own research and come up with their own opinions and thoughts. Typically, a new intake of students each year are really interested in recycling. That's their big thing. I think one of the things that I've always tried to do is although recycling is not, well, I think we feel very much that waste is bad, and recycling can be an excuse to carry on wasting, because it's okay, we're recycling. Yes, it's better than going to the landfill. So we try and educate that the waste is better. We have an eco committee at the senior school, and the students there have pretty powerful voice around the school. We have various things that I know is probably not the remit here, but one of the things we've introduced this year is a competition for the houses, which has previously been about energy and about big events. We're now awarding the boarding houses and the day houses with a green award if they can prove that they participate in certain things, and they also have to take on their own project as a boarding house. And our houses typically have about 50 students in them. So, and the school has about 1,300 students. So that's several projects that can be going on. And I think that's something in the future that would very much, I think is very much influenced by what I've heard here, and what I will share with the students. What else? You know, I think food waste is our big thing this term. We've slipped back. We were doing really well before lockdown, before COVID. We were doing really well with that, and now with bubbles and habits changing, we've slipped quite a way back, and we're now struggling with food waste. And we do various things to try and educate students about that and about where food comes from, and we work with our suppliers to try and get everything locally. And yeah, but I'm very keen that next term we start looking at insects, and I think as a school we can do an awful lot for insects. We've got things like beehives, we've got woodlands, we've got ponds, we've got wildflower areas, but are we doing it properly? Are we doing it well? Are we doing enough of it? And what can we do to tie these things all together? So I think that's really where I'd like to go next term with the eco committee. And as I say, it really needs to be the students' ideas. And we have lots more that we do for the bigger environment thing. But really, yeah, I think this has been very informative for me. Hearing what we can do going forward. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Carl. And also another perspective from the school, we've got Claire Luce, who's the head teacher at Otterhampton School, and she's going to tell us about the work she and her pupils have been doing.
Thank you, Stephen, and good evening, everyone. And firstly, thank you for inviting me to speak this evening about how my school, Otterhampton Primary School, has become involved with several projects with the Somerset Wildlife Trust. My name's Claire Luce, and I'm head teacher of Otterhampton, which is a very small primary school situated in the picturesque village of Cummage. We have beautiful views of the Quantock Hills from our school field, and we are very, very lucky to have the Steart Marshes on our doorstep. Back in January, I was contacted during the second lockdown by Tilda Gibbs from the Wildlife Trust about some exciting opportunities for the school to be involved in. This was perfect timing for us because we had had nearly 12 months of interrupted schooling, and we were excited about leaving the school and seeing something in our local area. On the 27th of April, we launched the Coastal Champions Award with a whole school assembly with Tilda. Year 6 were chosen as our A team, and they set about tackling some of the challenges from the Ripple Award, which was part of the Champions Award. The children were really engaged with completing the action plan. They installed water butts, they checked for leaky taps, they encouraged recycling, they displayed posters next to toilets to advertise that only the 3 Ps should be flushed down to keep blockages to a minimum. I'll leave that one for you to work out what those are. And this was really important to them, and they could see that they were making a difference to our small school and the state of the environment. It also gave them a focus for their final months of our school. Normally, we would be concentrating on SATs and revision and transition, but actually it was so lovely to see them getting excited about their environment and about nature rather than worrying about those things. The highlight of the summer term for them was a beach day at nearby Dunster. They took part in a scavenger hunt, they designed and made a sandhopper museum and completed a litter clean. Tilda ensured there was a great mix of fun and plenty of educational activities. The second initiative that we were involved in was the Brownie Copse Adventure Day in the village of Cummage. The aim of the day was to enable children to enjoy, to learn from, and be inspired by their local wild spaces and value their place in the world. Although the Brownie Copse is situated in the heart of the village, many of the children didn't know it existed. So the day was to raise awareness of the local environment and its biodiversity. Each class visited the copse and took part in fun and creative activities and games, which helped to promote team building, social and emotional development, and well-being. The children really enjoyed the opportunity to explore the copse, and many of them use this space in their spare time or have joined the organised conservation groups with Mark Ward from the Somerset Wildlife Trust in their own time during the weekends. In September, our year 3s and 4s embarked on the Wild Beach sessions. Every week for 5 weeks, which was quite a commitment, the team visited Dunster Beach with Tilda and took part in a range of opportunities to engage their local coastline. Transport was fully funded by Tilda and the team, and the children were absolutely inspired and found the weekly sessions highly valuable. Each week had a different focus and presented a relevant learning opportunity. The children loved the trips to the beach. I think it helped that every week we went, the sun shone, which helped, and it certainly raised awareness of the threats to the marine environments and what children can do, even in a small way, to protect them. The work that we have started with the Wildlife Trust has led to further opportunities at the school. We now have links to Isabel Pring, who is the England Coast Path Officer. As a result of contact made with her, we are looking at having a litter pick kit held at the school, which can be used by ourselves, but also the local community when exploring the marshes. I know that children will be keen to get their families using these litter picks at the weekend. This has also inspired our school council to complete litter picks at the school, but they're also keen to get out into the village to do litter picks. We link this to our school values, which form an important part of our school lives. We also have a forest school area on our site. We're very, very lucky. And on the back of the work at the COPs, children have expressed an interest through pupil surveys in developing that area, creating bug hotels, a seating area, and adapting it so that it's accessible to every student in our school. We now ensure that all preschool and Key Stage 1 children have access to forest school every week, as we know how important it is. This is just a very, very brief summary of our involvement with Somerset Wildlife Trust, and we are really looking forward to continuing to raise awareness of our local environment. The children, most importantly, have thoroughly enjoyed taking their learning outside, especially after the last 18 months to 2 years, and it has had huge benefits on their well-being and understanding of the environment. And we're excited for opportunities in the future. Many thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Claire. And again, the same messages are coming through, aren't they, from everyone about working together and the trust, I think, being at the centre. It's not that we have to do everything. You are doing such wonderful work out there, and we're there to help rather than necessarily initiate it. So I think this is working really well. It's very much what Team Wild is all about. We do have a video from Heathfield Community School, but we're running a little bit late. So what we're going to do is probably put that on the website later. So now I'd like to go and introduce Jolyon Chesworth. Jolyon's been working with the conservation sector for 20 years, even though he still looks ridiculously young. And he's been focusing on protecting, restoring and celebrating our marine environment. But he's now joined Somerset Wildlife Trust back in 2016, and he's leading the education, engagement, health and well-being programme, something so crucial to what we're doing. So Jolyon, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for the compliment. I wasn't expecting that. Hopefully you can see my my presentation. So yeah, my name's Jolyon Chesworth and I'm the Head of Engagement and Communities at Somerset Wildlife Trust. So I work with a team of people who basically focus on community engagement, education, volunteering and nature and well-being. And I guess to kind of put it simply, our job is to provide opportunities and encourage people to spend time in nature, to enjoy it, and then ultimately to look after it. That's kind of how I see my job and the work of my team. So we've heard about the science behind nature connection and how to sort of foster pro-environmental behaviours and some of the issues surrounding that. And we've also heard from some really inspirational sort of activities, actions that other people have been doing. Transition Town Wellington, you know, we invited them along to speak for a reason, because you know they do it so well. And similarly, it's great to hear from the schools. And I guess the reason we wanted to highlight and showcase the work that other people are doing is to try and inspire others to follow their lead. And that's really what Team Wilder is all about, and that's what tonight is all about. And certainly that's what Somerset Wildlife Trust are hoping to do over the coming years. All right. So you heard from Georgia a little earlier about our ambitions, our strategy, which directs us now till 2030. And kind of chief amongst that, obviously, is to try and really restore nature. It's not about just looking after what we've got now. We need to actually really start restoring and putting back all of the things that we've lost. And we're hoping to sort of restore about 30% of land and sea across Somerset for nature over the coming years. And currently we estimate only actually about 10% of land within Somerset is actually in good condition. And we're never going to be able to, as an organisation, own 30% of Somerset. So we really are absolutely reliant on other people taking action. So we have our core areas, our nature reserves. Other people own, you know, really special places for wildlife as well. But what we really need is to start filling in the gaps and creating those corridors and creating those networks and really understanding the impacts that all this action, all this activity is having. So that's why we need people. And it's not simply the case that, you know, community engagement is something that, you know, nature conservationists do on the side. It really is absolutely critical for us achieving our aims. We really need people to to step up in a time of, you know, fairly bleak crisis, if I'm honest, about nature, you know, biodiversity loss and climate change. We need people to actually take action themselves, because we simply can't do it alone. So Team Wilder really is about creating a movement for nature. Because of the state of the issues surrounding our natural world, it really needs to be done at scale. You know, a few people doing a little bit here and there is great, but it's not necessarily going to have the impacts that we need. And I hadn't heard the transition town sort of little strap line, if you like, but that's exactly it. We need communities to be taking action all across the county, and, you know, starting that movement. And there's quite a famous David Attenborough quote that many of you, I'm sure, will have heard. So, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. So first and foremost, when it comes to Team Wilder, we really want everybody just to, you know, enjoy being out in nature, to recognize it, whether that's in their gardens, whether that's in an urban park, or whether that's on one of our nature reserves. That's how you start your nature connection journey, by developing those 5 pathways. And the activities that, you know, we're trying to develop and then offer are really based on those 5 pathways of nature connection, to really sort of foster that real direct experience, so that people ultimately start to value it. And then Leah talked about the value action gap, and that's really critical for us. I think, you know, I speak to a lot of people in my job, and I think environmental awareness has been at an all-time high at the moment across all generations, but it's how we actually encourage people to step across that gap, and that's something that we need to bridge. One of the ways that we're hoping to do that is by focusing around sort of tipping points, and Georgia mentioned this briefly in her talk. So we hear a lot about tipping points in terms of bad tipping points, climate change, you know, melting sea ice and permafrost, but actually some tipping points are quite good, so they're the ones that we're going to focus on. And one of those is around sort of, it's been developed from social science, and there's a number of papers that have been written, quite a lot of research that suggests if a minority, but a significant minority, develop a behaviour, then they can attract the attention of others, the more significant majority, who will then start to copy that behaviour. So they create a sort of social tipping point. And this research has suggested that it's about 25% of a population, of a society. If 25% of people, or 1 in 4 people, are taking visible action, and in this case, visible action for nature, then they can really start to create that kind of critical mass that draws other people into this much bigger movement, that can really then start to have a difference. So we have an aim as part of Team Wilder, as part of our strategy, to encourage 1 in 4 people to take visible action for nature. So in terms of what Team Wilder will offer, well, it's not simply community engagement by another name. It's really more around community organisation and empowerment, and it's rooted in sort of encouraging ownership and stewardship within communities. And Transition Town Wellington is a great example of that. So community groups, they know themselves better than we do. They'll know what their assets are. They'll know what perhaps space is available for them to manage in a different way. They'll also know who their community members are, people with skills. They might be I don't know, farmers with access to machinery to do things, or they might be web designers, artists and illustrators, or just the people that actually make other people do stuff, those kind of community leaders. We don't know that about all of the communities in Somerset, whereas all of the different communities do. So everybody has something to offer, and our role really within Team Wilder is to try and help facilitate those conversations and to kind of bring people together, and to ask communities, to talk to communities, what are your ideas, and then how can we potentially help you to put those ideas into practice. And in order to do that, we can provide advice around sort of, the ecology of the local area, so that they can do things which will help link up some of those sites. And also training. So training might be practical land management. It might be training in how to set up a community group. Funding often can be a barrier for action. So training in how to write successful funding bids. So there's a whole raft of resources that we are hoping to produce over the coming months and years to really support community groups to start actually taking action, and also providing advice in terms of opportunities. What can community groups, or individuals for that matter, actually practically do? Okay, so one of the other things that we think is really important is around sort of visibility. And I talked briefly about that a moment ago. We want people to take action, but we want people to shout about it as well. And so we're hoping to develop a sort of a peer support approach, a kind of a networking approach where community groups can actually support each other. And tonight, in some respects, is a really good example of that, where, you know, the materials that Transition Town Wellington have produced, people have been writing in the chat function that they want to start using those, because, you know, different community groups have developed different materials, tried different things, sometimes failed, sometimes succeeded, and they will be able to share, hopefully, and impart some of that wisdom and knowledge. And it will also help people to understand that no matter how small the action might be within their little community, they're part of a much bigger picture. So we've already produced a map that's on our website at the moment, where community groups who are already active can put themselves on our map, and there's different icons for different groups, whether you're a community group, a school, or a recording group. And we're hoping that community groups that are currently in existence will put themselves on that, so we can get a sense of the scale of the action that's actually happening, and other people can see what's going on in their area, and they can then get in touch, find out what other groups have been doing and how they might be able to join, or how they might be able to repeat good practice in other parts of the county. So that's the kind of general sort of fundamental principles of Team Wild. It's very much about empowerment and training and support and advice. It's not us waltzing in and, you know, doing things for people. It's about us supporting people to do it for themselves. So in terms of how it would work practically, there's a number of different elements that I'm just going to go through very quickly because I'm conscious of the time. But Team Wild can, you know, it can be, you know, I've highlighted some particular key things we're looking to develop, but it could include, for instance, wilder businesses or wilder farming if other landowners are looking to support manage their land in better condition. So I'm just going to go through some of these. So Wilder Lives, I mean, that's kind of fundamental, really. It's pretty cool. It's about everyone experiencing nature as part of their everyday lives, on their doorstep, within, you know, all of the choices that they make every time somebody goes to the shops, or every time somebody, you know, travels, thinking about the impacts that might have on the environment and making informed choices. And those behaviours could be, I don't know, something as simple as the way that they manage their garden. There's over 400,000 hectares of garden in this country. If everybody did something in their garden for nature, then that could really add up to quite a lot. And we will use all our communication channels and all the influence that we have in the county to really champion sort of personal responsibility and offer ideas for everyday actions that people can take. Some of those actions, for instance, could include fundraising, community fundraising for us, so that we can continue to do our conservation work. It's a really important way that people can be visibly doing something to contribute towards conservation. You don't always have to get your own spade out. Okay, so volunteers have always been the lifeblood of the trust. I mean, without them we wouldn't exist. The volunteers, you know, they started the trust 50 odd years ago, and we continue to rely on volunteers, and Wilder Champions will be a key part of our volunteering offer. So they will be volunteers who will help us deliver Team Wilder across the county. So we will train them in, for instance, wildlife gardening, so that they can go out and support other people who want to help manage their gardens for wildlife, or community development champions, people who can go out to fledgling groups and support them, or champions within schools who can give assemblies and help schools manage their grounds better. So we want to recruit a whole raft of volunteers who can then go out into their communities and help them sort of roll Team Wilder out. And then we've got Wilder community. So Transition Town Wellington are a great example, whether they know it or not, of a Wilder community. But there's also loads of communities all over the county who are already doing things. And these groups are self-organised. They're focused on action. And they're actually doing things, you know, amongst themselves and coming up with their own ideas and putting them into practice. And usually there will be leaders within those communities, and we will look to train and support those leaders and the wider groups so that they can, you know, gain ideas, gain skills and experience, and help start to make sort of transformational difference on the ground. And those communities, they could be geographic or they could be demographic. So youth or faith-based communities would be a really great example. And Wilder Churches, if you haven't heard of it, there's more information on our website. That's a brilliant example of Team Wilder in action. Also, Wilder Schools and Wilder Youth. It was great to hear about all the activity that schools have been doing, and that's something that we're really keen to foster. We're very keen to support schools who want to take action for wildlife. We've currently got a project running at the moment which really aims to facilitate conversations amongst pupils and teachers to help them come up with their own ideas. And then we have money at the moment to be able to support those schools to put those ideas into action. So it's very much empowering. It's not about us telling schools what they should or shouldn't be doing. It's supporting them to come up with their own ideas, which is very much the kind of Team Wilder ethos. But as well as working within schools, we're keen to work with youth groups and individual young people across the county. And we've been working with the Youth Parliament, which are a really brilliant and inspiring bunch of young people. I went to a meeting that they had last week, and we talked through some of their environmental concerns and what bothers them most and where they think the best opportunities are. And they were carrying out some polls amongst themselves, and protecting the natural environment was one of the key things that they were interested in doing. So it's great for us as a conservation organisation. You know, we know young people are interested, and we can really try to support that and foster them. So in terms of what we can do right now, well, firstly, it'd be really, brilliant if you checked out the Team Wilder web pages. We spent quite a lot of time reorganising that, and we've already been developing some of those training resources. So people who are interested in wildlife gardening can have a look. There's loads of stuff on there. Also, if people are particularly interested in a particular skill that they might not have, if a number of people get in touch with us, we can develop specific training resources for that. Grassland management is one specific example. Loads of people got in touch saying they want to manage verges, parks, and other green spaces better for wildlife. So we created a bespoke a grassland management course for that, which is now on our website, so people can use. We've also got a dedicated email address where we're really keen to hear from people who are interested in taking action, so you can get in touch and we can try and support through that. And we've got a Facebook page specifically for Team Wilder. So it's a way that people can communicate with each other as well as directly with us. And we've also got the map, so do have a look at the map. And if you're a community group already, think about having yourself put on that so you can share and celebrate what you're already doing. I would also, a little plea, I guess, our strategy's only recently been launched. It lasts till 2030. We're very much at the beginning, so be a little patient. We are still developing our resources. We're still developing our training programs. We can't, sadly, at the moment, go and visit community groups, or as many community groups as we would like to, all over the county. But we do have a number of significant funding applications in at the moment, which will help us develop our resources so we can be a lot more hands-on. But I would say that we're at the start of this journey, so please bear that in mind. And I think the final message really is that anybody can take action wherever you are, however big, however small. And I think, some of the speakers that we've heard tonight really demonstrate that. So I will leave it there now and hand back to Stephen for our question session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jolyon. We've now got about 15 minutes. We've got our panel of speakers. We've got Jolyon, Claire, Carl, Anita, Helen and Leah. And I'm going to kick off by asking a slightly tricky question, so feel free to put your hand up if you want to answer this. There's always been an issue, and this is coming up in the comments on the chat box, that there's the danger, isn't there, that we're slightly preaching to the converted. I'd be very interested to hear your views on how we reach those people who are marginalised in our society, who are underprivileged, and that of course includes children, but it also includes disabled people, people of colour who perhaps don't always feel that they're integrated into the countryside. How do we reach the people who haven't perhaps thought as hard as everyone here has about what to do and bring them on board? Who would like to answer that one first? How do we close the gap, Leah?
I think one thing to really think about is we're always talking about gardening actions a lot, and that was something I noticed when I started my PhD about three and a half years ago. When you looked at what actions were advertised, they were all about gardening, and some of my research has shown that one group of people that reports not having access to a garden are children of parents with lower socioeconomic groups. So I think kind of panning out away from only gardening and focusing on actions that people can engage in without having access to a garden is really important as well. And we're seeing more and more political action every year. Thinking back to what some of the people from school said, that's something that teenagers seem to be interested in as well, political actions, protests, etc. So including actions that people can actually engage in is really important, I think.
Thank you, Leah. Anita, over to you.
Just picking up on what Leah was saying, really, one of the things that we've found connects everyone, even if they don't have a garden and even if they're not interested apparently in nature, is food. And it seems to me that that's something that just that we need to somehow find our way back to a connection with our environment through what we eat, and that link between the growing of food and the consuming of food and delicious food, and who we are on the planet and how we sustain ourselves from that is just, it cuts through every possible barrier of class and race and ability and disability and sexuality and age and everything. We all need food and we all like food. And if you can use that as a way of drawing people into the conversation and saying, look, we're just all connected. There is nothing that lives outside of nature. I mean, it's a kind of contradiction in terms, So, but I think it's a really, really important question. I'm really glad that you brought it up, Stephen, because I think when you're inside the kind of everyone loves nature bubble, it's quite hard to step outside of that and say, well, actually, some people feel like nature in their minds is associated with class and privilege and people who have the leisure to go out into the countryside and enjoy it. But actually, nature, particularly in the 21st century, isn't that. It is the fact that we're all living, breathing the same air, we're all eating the same food. We need to make sure that the soil is healthy so that we can survive,
Absolutely. And of course, as you say, bringing nature into towns, and I've seen that happen in Taunton, where there's a lot of work, and obviously as Claire talked about in her school, the fact that the children didn't know what was in their own backyard. Is that something, Claire, you've come across, that some of the children who you're dealing with weren't really connected, or their parents weren't connected with nature?
Absolutely. And I think making every one of those opportunities fun and accessible to everyone, and nothing is a barrier to some of the things that we've been doing, and of course there are families that are in all weekend and are on their Xboxes and don't go outside and everything. But I think education, by educating the younger children, they can then infuse their parents and families. The COPs was a great example of that, because the children were starting to get excited about it at school, and then when Mark was advertising the conservation groups, then the children were saying, oh, come on mum, let's get invited, let's get involved, let's go down there. And I think as a head teacher, if I can be as kind of infectious and involved as I can and enthused about it, then the children will be enthused, and therefore they will have an impact on their families. And I think parents will find it hard to say no if children are trying to drag the parents down to the COPs at the weekend. I think they'll struggle to say no.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things we've talked about a lot at the Trust, and obviously Jolyon, this is your very central part of your work, isn't it? Is the whole health and well-being agenda. Clearly, Team Wilder is primarily about restoring nature, and it should be that, as Leah spoke about the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis. But what are the benefits that any of you have seen in terms of engaging people in the way that Claire talked about there? Jolyon, that was you.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, sad as it is for me to say, not everybody's that interested in nature. So I think when it comes to, trying to work with people who are not already engaged. We need to spend time properly understanding these different communities and what their motivations are. And I think food, as Anita said, is certainly one of them, but I think health is also a really important way of helping people to understand why the natural world is relevant to them. And by way of, I suppose, one example, so we are running a project at the moment called Somerset Nature Connections, which aims to support people who are experiencing poor mental health through nature connection. And there was one participant who recently started, who, when we were speaking to them before they'd shown up for any of our sessions, was like, oh, I'm probably not going to come. I think it's going to be too much for me. You know, I'm not really sure that it's for me anyway. But they did come along, and they have not missed a single session through, you know, all of the bad weather that we've had. That person who had never even, literally, they had never even noticed a butterfly. I expect they'd seen one, but they probably had never really noticed it, has now joined, I probably shouldn't say this, joined Butterfly Conservation Trust. They've bought their Field Studies Council guides of butterflies, and they're going out and they're actually, you know, taking a real genuine interest. And nature wasn't for them. They sort of got in touch with us because of the health issues that they've been experiencing. So I think it's really important that we work with people like on their level, on the things that they're interested in. We can't just sit on our nature reserves and expect people to come to us. We have to go into the communities where people are and, you know, talk to them, understand, you know, what their, you know, concerns are, what things they're dealing with, and try and demonstrate that nature can have a place in helping them within their life and within their world.
Thanks, Julian. We've had a lot of questions, as we always do at these events, where people need help and advice. They want to act, and perhaps they want to act within their community, or perhaps they're a teacher, or perhaps they run a business and they want to do something rather than just a personal act. They want to inspire others. But it's clear from some of the questions that people are slightly struggling to know where they can get advice. Now, obviously, Anita and Helen, you spoke very articulately about how you have found a practical way to share advice. Have you learned something from doing that? Have you found that people, as well as Wedmore, are, you know, cropping up doing stuff because you've given them that help, that start, really?
I was going to answer halfway through your question and had an idea, but now I'm not quite sure what to say. I mean, I was going to say that I'm not an expert in things, but I quite like researching, and I think it's quite nice doing a lot of research and figuring out things for yourself. And I really like the iNaturalist app actually as a tool for that, because you don't necessarily need to know what something is, but you can have it identify it for you, and I think that's a really good way of learning.
And one of the things that I think, Helen, you've said before in forums like this is that it's quite easy to assume from looking at the outside at what Transition Town Wellington has done over the last couple of years that we're hugely well resourced and there are like hundreds of us, and feel like intimidated that, you know, we're just a small group and we don't have your clout, but we're really not. We're a small bunch of enthusiastic bumbling amateurs who like doing stuff, and it's you really only need maybe 4 or 5 people who are willing to take responsibility for something and sort of get something going.
Yeah.
And recently some of us attended or were able to do a forest garden design course, and our teacher Rakesh came up with a lovely formulation, which I think is just a really useful rule of thumb to have in your head, which is if it's safe enough to try and good enough for now, just go ahead and do it. Because I think we sort of stop ourselves quite often from doing stuff because we think it's not perfect, or we think we're not qualified enough.
You learn on the job.
You learn on the job, and it's a luxury. It's a luxury we absolutely cannot afford, given where we are in our ecological crisis and in our climate crisis. you can't kind of afford to sit back and wait until you're qualified to do something. You've got to get on with it, is how I feel.
I think that's very valid. Carl and Claire, have you sought support from the trust or other places? Because obviously in a school, it's, you know, you're working with the pupils, with the staff in the school, but have you found a way of getting advice and help from outside organisations? Carl first. Your mic's off, sorry.
Thank you. Put simply, over the last 18 months, no. Previously, we're very lucky. We've got a large staff and a large community really at the school. So there's lots of contacts within that. But I don't think we do it enough. We definitely don't do it enough. And it's been, I've been scribbling down things as I've seen things fly up the side here, and think there's an awful lot here that I wasn't aware of that we can certainly get involved in. It can be difficult to get children away from the school, certainly over the last 18 months. But yeah, so who have we done work with? Usually local communities that have got somebody involved with, whether it be the National Trust, where we've had staff who are involved with the National Trust, quite a bit through the Lions actually, who do individual little projects in the area, and local villages. But yeah, there's an awful lot more we can do, I think.
Thank you very much. And Claire, you said obviously you got help from Mark from the Trust.
Yeah, Mark and Tilda from the Trust, but I would also say that we're very different to Carl in that we're a very small school. So often I'll put out kind of messages to parents, just because I think sometimes you're not always aware of what's on your doorstep and who can help. And I know when I put out a message of, you know, who can help us sort out the Forest School area, all of a sudden I had a parent that's a tree surgeon. I had a parent that actually is an expert in weaving willow, and actually, you know, just by kind of seeking the people that are closest to the school and have the most, you know, the most opportunity to invest, I guess, into the school when they've got children there. We've used, you know, people close to home. We're also situated really close to Hinkley Point, so EDF have come in to help us do different things in the school, but you know, clearing areas is something that I can ask them to help with. So but definitely Tilda and Mark from the Wildlife Trust, and also Isabel Pring, like I said, who is the Coastal Paths Officer, and I'm really interested in getting some links with her in order to set up the litter pick kit.
So it's all about connecting, is it? That's what we've heard tonight. That's been the message from all the presentations. Jolyon, could I just ask you briefly, just as the last thing before we say our goodbyes, just to sort of sum up what you think it's all about? Sorry, I think it's calling me or you.
I don't recognise that ringtone, so hopefully that's you, Stephen. If you pop yourself on.
Sorry.
Okay. So in terms of summing up, I mean, hopefully tonight, you know, you've heard both inspiring stories, but perhaps you've gathered, I hope, a sense of Somerset Wildlife Trust's ambition and aspiration to provide sort of meaningful advice and opportunities and support to help you. I think one of the comments was we need meaningful guidance, not evangelism. And, you know, I understand that. We do need to be able to offer something tangible for individuals and communities. And I think, you know, we've started doing that with the resources that we've already produced. So if people want to know something, they can often find it on our website. The other thing is, you know, we don't have all of the answers. There are other people also that have, you know, huge amounts of information and resources on their website. So I think, as Helen said, you know, research is a powerful tool, and you know, we have the world at our fingertips now. But we are keen to hear from people if there are particular needs that people have. You know, we can try to create particular resources that meet those needs. But I hope really, you know, my key message from tonight is that, you know, it is within our power, all of us, to sort of to take action, and that Somerset Wildlife Trust over the, you know, the coming few years will hopefully be here to really support that and encourage and inspire and to connect you, because I think that really is one of the key points of Team Wilder. It's not about us doing everything. It's about, you know, fostering a network of environmental activists around the country who are all doing something positive.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jolyon. Well, thank you again to our fantastic guests. Really, really inspiring talks, and those wonderful connections between them has been great. There's more information about Team Wilder being shared at the AGM Members Day in November. We're going to have a link in the chat here, or you can just check out our website. If you'd like to donate, I always have to ask this question, don't I? If you'd like to donate and would like to do so, you can do so through our Somerset Wildlife Trust page. Hannah's also put a link in the chat here. We'd be very grateful if you in the audience would complete a short feedback survey that we're going to send, because we really try to listen to what you're saying and improve each presentation we do. And we'll email that out to you. And the third in the series of these Team Wilder events, as Georgia and Jolyon said, is Tuesday the 30th of November. So please join us then. There won't be much else to do. It'll be cold and wet by then, won't it? And dark. So please come along. And we're going to leave you with the Team Wilder video for a bit of inspiration. So thank you again and have a safe journey home. Good night.
Look outside your door and you'll find some of the UK's most wonderful wildlife, from bats, birds and butterflies to poppies and pond life. But times are changing. You may already know that the humble hedgehog is in trouble. 95% of our prickly pals have already disappeared, and they're not alone. One by one, the calls of turtle doves and nightingales have disappeared too. The rate of decline started slowly, but it's speeding up. We're approaching an irreversible tipping point. But with your help, we can tip the scales back into nature's favour. If just 1 in 4 people are willing to take action that supports our wildlife, we can transform our counties. You can start as small and as local as you like. You could cut a hole in your garden fence to create a hedgehog highway, plant bee-friendly flowers in your window box, or join like-minded neighbours in lobbying your local MP. Each contribution can make a big difference, like the butterfly that flaps its wings and causes a tornado. Whatever action you take, Team Wilder can help. Join Team Wilder today and you'll find all the advice, training and support you, your school or your community needs. So why not join Team Wilder now and start mending our broken nature network?